Have you ever heard a story so twisted, so quietly erased from local records, that even the oldest folks in the Appalachian Mountains whisper about it only after sunset? They call it the Blackwood Curse. Two sisters who lived far beyond the last marked road, where the trees grew thicker than prayers and the crows didn't sing, they warned. And every man who went looking for them was never seen again. What really happened in that cabin? Was it madness? Witchcraft? Or something far, far older than humanity itself? The year was 1892. Hollow Ridge, Missouri, a small mountain community caught between the collapse of old coal routes and the rise of superstition. Locals knew to stay away from the Blackwood property, 30 acres of dying pines where fog never lifted and animals refused to graze. The land had belonged to the Blackwood family since before the Civil War, but after the plague of 1879, only two remained, Clara and Elspeth Blackwood. The sisters were rarely seen. They never came to town except for salt, flour, and kerosene. When they did, they wore long black mourning dresses, their hair uncut and eyes so pale they almost looked blind. Children whispered they could see in the dark. That winter, Hollow Ridge lost 3 men, all of them miners, all of them poor, and all of them last seen heading north toward the Blackwood woods. Sheriff Marlin Pike rode out one gray morning to question the sisters. His deputy warned him not to go alone, but Pike wasn't a man of superstition. By noon, his horse returned. No rider. The cabin was found at dusk, perched above a ravine, its wood swollen black with years of rain and rot. Inside, the stove was still burning, but the room was cold as a grave. The sheriff's hat lay on the floor, half sunk in blood. No bodies, no sisters, only one thing left behind, a child's drawing pinned to the wall. 2 women standing over a pit, and something crawling up from it. The search party left Hollow Ridge at dawn. 9 men, rifles strapped across their backs, faces hard as the frost biting their beards. Sheriff Pike's disappearance had rattled the town. His wife swore she heard his voice outside the window at night, whispering her name, though his body had never been found. The path to the Blackwood cabin wound through a narrow pass where even sunlight hesitated. Locals said the trees there leaned inward, as if trying to swallow whatever walked between them. By mid-morning, the men reached the clearing. The cabin looked smaller in daylight, the kind of place built to hide something, not house it. Deputy Jonas Weller pushed open the warped door. Inside, silence. Dust hung in the air like fine ash. And then they saw it. The floor. Someone had torn up the planks near the hearth. Fresh dirt was piled beside a black opening that led down into the earth. The air coming from it was wet and hot, like the breath of something alive. "Smells like rot," one man muttered. "Smells like the devil," said another. Jonas knelt at the edge, his lantern trembling. He lowered it in. The light didn't travel far, only a few feet before the darkness swallowed it whole. But there were scratches on the walls, claw marks, deep and desperate, and bones. Small ones at first. Then bigger, human ribs. By the time they climbed down, they found a tunnel, narrow and crooked, like a burrow dug by something that had no concept of walls or gravity. It twisted deep below the cabin, the dirt slick with a black, oily moisture. The tunnel ended at a cavern lined with figures. At first they thought they were statues. Then one of them blinked. The light caught a face, or what had once been a face. The skin looked melted, the eyes wide and empty. Their mouths were moving soundlessly, like they were trying to remember how to scream. Jonas whispered, "Dear God." And from the darkness behind them a voice answered, slow, drawn and echoing, like it came through water. "God doesn't live here." When they turned, 2 women stood by the pit's entrance, pale, barefoot, and smiling through cracked lips. Clara and Elspeth Blackwood. Each held a candle made from something that wasn't wax. And as the flame flickered, the faces carved into the cavern walls began to move. By sunset, only 2 men from the search party made it back to Hollow Ridge. Jonas Weller and a miner named Caleb Dent. They stumbled into town, mud-soaked, eyes wild, both muttering the same name through cracked lips. Blackwood. Blackwood. The others never came back. Jonas refused to speak for hours. He just sat outside the sheriff's office, staring toward the mountains as if something was still watching him from the tree line. When the preacher came to pray over him, Jonas laughed, a hollow, broken laugh, and whispered, "Pray all you want." "She's already inside." No one understood what he meant, not until nightfall. The bell at St. Brigide's church rang 3 times that night, though no one was inside to pull the rope. The townsfolk woke to see a red glow bleeding through the mist. The church, their only sanctuary, was on fire. The flames weren't normal. They rose green and black, flickering like shadow made solid. And within those flames, through the stained glass windows, people swore they saw faces. Not human ones, long mouths. Hollow eyes, twisted shapes dancing where pews once stood. The preacher ran in screaming the Lord's Prayer. He never came out. Jonas watched it all from the edge of town, Caleb beside him, clutching a rosary until his palms bled. Then, over the crackling fire, they both heard it again. Her voice. Jonas. Soft. Gentle. Calling his name the way a mother calls her child to supper. And from the burning doorway of the church, something stepped out. A woman, barefoot, her dress untouched by flame. Her hair long as her shadow. Her eyes, black. Clara Blackwood. Jonas fell to his knees. She said she'd come, he whispered. She said the fire would open the way. Then he smiled and walked straight into the burning church. Caleb tried to stop him, but the door slammed shut behind Jonas. And for a moment, through the window, Caleb saw two figures standing together inside the flames, holding hands. By morning, St. Brigid's was nothing but ash and silence. The fire hadn't spread, not to a single nearby tree or building. It had burned only what was holy. And carved into the soot of the altar were 3 words, written in something too dark to be ink: Sisters are risen. By the 3rd week after the church fire, Hollow Ridge had changed. The mist never lifted anymore. It clung to the trees and homes like a second skin. Animals were vanishing. The sound of frogs, birds, even insects, gone. The only thing that moved in the night now were footsteps. At first, people thought it was just paranoia, until the Wilkes family disappeared. Their house sat on the far edge of town where the road bent into the woods, the same path that led straight toward the old Blackwood property. At dawn, a passerby found their door hanging open. Inside, the breakfast table was set, the coffee still warm. But the family, all 6 of them, were gone. On the floor near the hearth, someone had drawn a circle in soot. Inside it, 7 finger bones and a single lock of hair were arranged like a star. And on the wall above the table, burned into the wood, same words found in the church: Sisters are risen. By nightfall, the town's men gathered in front of the saloon. Some carried rifles, others crosses. A few brought salt, iron nails, and holy water stolen from the ruins of St. Brigid's. Caleb Dent, the only surviving witness of the Blackwood pit, tried to stop them. He told them the truth: you can't kill what's not alive. But they didn't listen. They formed a group of 12 and set out toward the Hollow Road, a narrow dirt trail that disappeared into the heart of the forest. The trees there grew too close together. Their branches wove so thickly that moonlight couldn't reach the ground. The men walked in single file, their lanterns flickering against trunks carved with symbols they didn't understand. Halfway through the woods, the air changed. No wind, no sound, just the slow, steady noise of something breathing under the soil. The leader, Hank Doran, lifted his lantern. "You hear that?" Then, from behind them, someone answered. A woman's voice. Soft. Familiar. Welcome home. The light went out. The woods erupted with screams. When the survivors stumbled back to town hours later, their eyes were wide and empty, the pupils milky white like boiled pearls. They couldn't speak, couldn't eat, couldn't sleep. They just kept whispering one thing, over and over in unison. The Hollow Road leads down. By morning, the mist had spread past the ridge and rolled into the valley. It carried a faint sound with it, a woman humming an old mountain lullaby. The same tune mothers once sang to their children before they started disappearing. By early spring of 1893, Hollow Ridge was a ghost town. Half the cabins were empty, doors left swinging, fires long dead in their hearths. The air carried a smell no one could name, not rot, not smoke, but something heavy and metallic like breathing iron. Caleb Dent, the last sane soul left in Hollow Ridge, spent his nights barricaded in the church ruins, sleeping beside a rusted crucifix. He hadn't spoken to another living person in weeks until a stranger arrived. The man's name was Dr. Silas Crane, a folklorist from St. Louis. He claimed to be investigating a series of mountain anomalies, strange deaths, unnatural births, and stories of women who spoke to the soil. He had come for one reason: the Blackwood Sisters. Caleb warned him to leave, but Crane wasn't afraid. He carried a leather-bound field journal filled with sketches of ancient Appalachian carvings, symbols identical to the ones etched into the Blackwood cabin walls. "This isn't witchcraft," Crane said, adjusting his wire spectacles. "It's older, pre-colonial. The settlers found something buried here, and the Blackwoods woke it." That night, Crane convinced Caleb to guide him up the Hollow Road. The moon hung low, swollen and red as a wound. As they approached the ruins of the Blackwood cabin, the earth beneath them trembled. Not from an earthquake, but from something alive deep below. They found the pit again, the same one Jonas Weller's men had unearthed months ago. But it was wider now. The dirt around it slick and pulsing. Dr. Crane dropped a weighted lantern into the darkness. The light fell for nearly 10 seconds before it struck something wet and started to move. The sound that rose up wasn't human. It was a chorus of moans and low, sucking gasps, the kind that make your stomach twist before your mind even understands why. Caleb whispered, trembling. She said it was waiting to be born. From the pit came a rush of air, thick, hot, and stinking of decay. And then they saw them. Clara and Elspeth Blackwood stood on the far side of the pit, their skin no longer pale, but gray, veined, and slick. Their eyes reflected the lantern light like the eyes of an animal. "You came to see," Clara said softly. "Now you'll help it finish." The ground split with a wet, cracking sound. Crane screamed as the pit opened wider, swallowing half the cabin. What crawled up from that hole wasn't something that belonged to any species known to man. It was tall, boneless, its flesh sliding like wet clay, its face shifting between the sisters and something else, something ancient. And when it spoke, it used their voices. "We were never two," it said. "We were one, dreaming of a body." Caleb ran. Dr. Crane didn't. When Caleb reached the edge of the woods, he turned once, just long enough to see the cabin collapse inward, the earth devouring it whole. The light vanished. The forest went still. And then, the mountain sighed. Weeks later, a letter was found at the St. Louis Folklore Society, unsigned, but written in Crane's hand. It read, "The Blackwood name will die, but what they carried will not. The mountain has found its heart again." 3 months passed after the night the Blackwood cabin vanished into the earth. Spring had come to the Appalachians, but the valley around Hollow Ridge remained lifeless. No birds returned. No flowers bloomed. Only fog. A fog that moved against the wind. Caleb Dent tried to rebuild. He cleared the burned foundation of St. Brigide's, planting a small wooden cross where the altar once stood. He thought if he could bring prayer back to the valley, maybe the mountain would sleep again. But one morning he found footprints outside the church. Small ones. Barefoot, leading from the forest straight to the wooden cross. And there, sitting beside it, silent, watching him, was a little girl. She couldn't have been more than 8. Her hair was matted with mud, her skin pale and freckled. She wore a dress made from something rough and old, as though stitched together from sacks. Caleb asked her name. She tilted her head and smiled. "Ellie," she said. There hadn't been a child in Hollow Ridge for months, not since the Wilkes family vanished. When he asked where her parents were, she looked toward the mountains and whispered, "They're still sleeping. Mama says I woke up too soon." He took her in, fed her bread and milk, and let her sleep near the fire. At night, she hummed softly, an old mountain lullaby he hadn't heard since childhood. The same one people used to say the Blackwood Sisters sang to each other during storms. On the 3rd night, Caleb woke to a sound, low, wet, rhythmic. He thought it was rain, but when he looked toward the fireplace, the girl wasn't there. The door creaked open. Outside, footprints again. This time leading back toward the forest. He followed them by lantern light, calling her name. "Ellie!" The woods were silent, until he saw her, standing at the tree line, barefoot, her dress soaked through, her hair hanging in clumps. In her hands, she held something that gleamed under the light. A rosary. He stepped closer. "Where did you get that?" She looked up. "It was inside me," she said calmly. "Mama said it's what was left of the man who prayed too loud." The ground beneath her feet began to pulse, faintly, like a heartbeat under soil. And when Caleb lifted his lantern higher, he saw dozens of tiny handprints pressed into the mud around her, some old, some fresh. Ellie smiled wider. She said the others are coming soon. The mountain wants more children. Caleb turned and ran, tripping through the mist until he reached the road. Behind him, the woods began to move, trees bending like they were bowing towards something crawling up from the ground. He didn't stop running until Hollow Ridge was miles behind him. When he finally looked back, the fog over the mountain had turned black, swirling in slow, steady circles like something breathing beneath it. Weeks later, a traveler passing through found the church cross toppled and broken. Carved into the dirt beside it, written in a child's hand, were 5 words. "Mama says I'm not alone." The curse of Hollow Ridge did not stay buried. Evil never does. By autumn, the fog had drifted down the mountain, following the creek until it reached the small mining town of Asheville, a quiet place of red clay roads, leaning porches, and tired faces. The people of Asheville weren't strangers to tragedy. Mining collapses, drownings, coughing sickness. But this was different. It began with the children. The first was Thomas Griggs, a miner's boy who went missing one Sunday morning while walking to church with his mother. He was found 2 days later, sitting at the edge of the river, his clothes dry but his skin pale as milk. When they asked where he'd been, he only said, "Playing with Ellie." There was no Ellie in town. He began humming the same mountain lullaby others had heard echoing from Hollow Ridge, that soft, crooked tune that rose and fell like a dying breath. And then more children began humming it too. One by one. The priest of Asheville, Father Milton, tried to bless the town. He carried a censer through every home, whispering Latin prayers that shook in his throat. But in every house where he prayed, the crucifixes turned upside down, nails bent, wood split. By the third day, he stopped speaking the prayers aloud, because he swore he could hear someone repeating them back from under the floorboards. The town doctor, Harriet Lorne, noticed something else. The children's pupils had started to change, small gray rings forming around the iris, like smoke trapped in their eyes. And when they slept, their bodies twitched rhythmically, as if something unseen was pulling at their strings. She told the parents to keep the children indoors. But the parents were changing too. At the Griggs home, Mrs. Griggs was found whispering to her fireplace, saying her dead husband had come back through the smoke. At the schoolhouse, the teacher, Miss Kincaid, carved the word remember into the wooden desks until her hands bled. And in the church, Father Milton vanished. All they found was his robe, folded neatly on the altar, and a single note beneath it. She said we forgot God, so she sent her own. By winter, Ashevale was empty. Windows boarded, doors chained. But travelers who pass by say at night, you can still hear children laughing near the churchyard, soft, muffled, echoing from underground. Sometimes, if you listen close enough, one voice sings above the rest. A little girl's. Her name drifts through the fog like a memory that refuses to die. Ellie. And the melody she hums? It's the same one from Hollow Ridge. The curse had learned to travel, to move with the fog. And by the time winter thawed, the next town over, Marrow Creek, was already seeing strangers knocking at night. Small hands, bare feet, and a single question whispered through the cracks in the door. Can I come in? Mama said you forgot to pray. They say you can't hear fog, that it moves in silence, a ghost without a voice. But the people of Marrow Creek knew better, because the fog that rolled in that January evening wasn't quiet. It sang, a soft, distant hum that slipped between trees and under doors, a sound that wasn't quite human, but too familiar to ignore, like a lullaby remembered from a dream you never had. It started in the hills, then the barns, then the church bell began to ring on its own. Sheriff Amos Hensley was the first to notice the sound wasn't fading. It was layering. One voice became two became six, and soon the fog carried what sounded like a choir of women and children, humming in perfect, haunting harmony. He gathered a few men, rifles in hand, and went to find the source. They followed the sound up the ridge road, through the woods where even the moonlight looked afraid to go. Every few minutes, the song would stop, and when it stopped, so did they, because that silence felt alive, like something was listening back. When they reached the old Keller barn, they saw the light first, a dull red pulse leaking through the cracks in the boards. Amos motioned for the men to stay behind. He pushed the door open. The smell hit him first, rot, damp hay, and the sour stench of something burned long ago. And there, hanging from the rafters like broken puppets, were the townsfolk of Ashevale. Their skin was gray, their eyes hollow. But their mouths were moving, humming. Their voices merged into one low, trembling harmony that shook the barn itself, a hymn of the dead. Then Amos saw her, standing in the center, bare feet on the dirt, white hair tangled like cobwebs. Her hands swayed like she was conducting the song, the eldest Blackwood sister. Her eyes glowed faintly in the dark, two dying embers burning inside a corpse that refused to decay. "Do you hear them?" she whispered. "They're learning to sing again." When Amos raised his gun, she only smiled and pointed behind him. The men were gone. Only the fog remained, thicker now, pressing against him, humming in his ear. Voices of children giggling, whispering his name, calling him Papa. He fired wildly into the dark. Once, twice, and then nothing. When morning came, the barn was empty. No bodies. No fog. No sound. Just footprints. Tiny barefoot prints leading down the hill toward town. By the next night, Marrow Creek was singing too. Dozens of voices, deep, high, old, young, all joining in that same awful lullaby. No one slept. Those who tried said they felt hands touching their faces in the dark, pressing cold fingers to their lips to hush them. When the sun rose, half the town was gone. The church bell rang 27 times, one for each missing soul. And when the last echo died, a new line appeared on the side of the church, carved deep into the wood. The hollow choir grows. The curse had become a song, one that fed on grief, memory, and prayer. Every town that heard it joined the chorus. Every voice added strength. And somewhere deep in the mountains, the Blackwood Sisters stood beneath a dead oak, their mouths open wide, their song reaching the heavens. But heaven wasn't listening anymore. They say on February 2nd, 1893, the moon bled over the Appalachian sky. Not crimson like sunset, but black-red, the color of spoiled wine. And beneath that eerie glow, a preacher named Ezekiel Thorne stood before his dying congregation, and tried to convince them that God still lived in these mountains. But by then, the Blackwood curse had already taken root in every breath of air. The town of Merrow Creek was silent. No dogs barked. No crickets sang. The wind itself had gone still, as if nature was holding its breath. Inside the First Baptist Church, the pews were half empty. Those who'd stayed came with pale faces and trembling hands, clutching crosses and oil lamps, their eyes darting toward the doors. They all knew someone who'd gone missing. A mother. A child. A neighbor who went into the woods and never came back. But worse were the ones who did return, because their voices weren't their own anymore. "Brothers and sisters," the preacher began, his voice echoing in the hollow space, "the devil walks these hills. He comes as song, and he comes as shadow. But he froze." That sound again, a faint hum rising from the floorboards. Low at first, then building. Women began to cry. A child covered her ears, and as the lanterns flickered, someone whispered, "It's them." They're outside. Ezekiel grabbed the iron crucifix from the altar and stepped toward the door. When he opened it, the fog rolled in, thick and white, moving like it had a pulse. And within that fog, the silhouettes of women, tall, barefoot, hair like ash, skin stretched tight over bone. Each face identical, each humming softly. The Blackwood Sisters. All 7 of them, and in their hands they carried lanterns made from skulls, glowing faintly from the inside. "Your God won't come," one of them said. Her voice wasn't cruel. It was gentle, almost pitying. Ezekiel raised the crucifix higher, but the metal began to melt in his hands, dripping like wax. The hymn grew louder. People inside began to scream. Some clawed at their ears, trying to tear the sound out. Others stood still, eyes rolled back, mouthing the words though they'd never heard them before. The fog poured into the church, and as it filled the aisles, it brought faces with it, those who'd gone missing. Their eyes were empty, but their lips moved in unison with the sisters' song, a symphony of the damned. Ezekiel stumbled backward, tripping over the altar rail. He crawled to the pulpit and whispered, "If I burn, you burn too." He grabbed the oil lamp, smashed it against the wood, and the fire leapt like it had been waiting for the invitation. Flames climbed the walls. The hymn never stopped. Even as the roof cracked and the windows exploded, the singing only grew stronger. Outside, the villagers saw the church burning and heard the song echo across the valley, soft, melodic, and eternal. When dawn came, the fire was out. The church was gone, but from the ashes, faint singing still drifted on the wind. And carved into one of the surviving beams was a new message. Fire cannot silence the choir. It only teaches them to sing louder. In the years that followed, travelers passing through Merrow Creek swore they could still hear hymns echoing through the fog. A chorus of women and children singing to no one and everyone at once. Some said it was the wind. Others said it was the Blackwoods, calling home the ones who forgot them. But Ezekiel Thorne's Bible was found decades later, in those same woods. Its pages fused by heat, words blackened by smoke. On the last readable page, one sentence remained clear, scrawled in shaking ink. They were never human to begin with. The fire that consumed the church should have ended the nightmare. But like all things born from evil, the Blackwood curse doesn't die in flames. It only changes shape, and on the morning after the fire, when the smoke still clung to the branches like ash, Ezekiel Thorne's wife, Miriam, went into labor. The problem was, Ezekiel had been dead for 2 days. Miriam was found crawling out of the woods barefoot, her dress torn and covered in mud. Her belly looked wrong, swollen unevenly, moving in ways that no unborn child should move. The midwife who helped her later said, "It wasn't a birth, it was an exorcism." Inside the one-room cabin, candles flickered weakly against the windows. Each gust of wind made them dance, and each flicker seemed to echo the strange movements beneath Miriam's skin. She screamed, gripping the wooden frame of the bed until her nails split. Then, silence. A sound followed, wet, heavy breathing. Then, crying, but not a baby's cry. It was deep, raspy, like something that had learned how to mimic the sound of an infant. When the midwife looked down, she saw 2 infants, twins, but their skin was pale, almost translucent. Their veins pulsed blue beneath the surface like roots searching for soil, and their eyes. One was pitch black, the other, glowing faintly gold. They didn't blink, they just stared. Miriam died within the hour. The midwife swore the twins never stopped staring at her as she covered the body. One of them made a sound, not a cry, but a word. A name, Ezekiel. The midwife dropped the cloth and ran into the woods, never to return. A few weeks later, travelers passing through Merrow Creek began reporting something strange. At night, they'd hear singing, like children's voices, near the burned church. And by dawn, they'd find footprints in the ash. tiny at first. Then, larger, as if someone was growing fast. Too fast. By spring, the Blackwood property was rumored to be cursed again. Animals went missing. Corpses were found near the creek, drained of blood, eyes open wide in terror, and near each body, small handprints pressed deep into the mud. In June 1893, a man named Henry Clove claimed he saw them. 2 figures, no older than 7, standing by the river. They were singing to their own reflection, holding hands, but as he watched, the reflections stopped moving. The girls kept singing, but the water version began smiling, and then the reflection reached out of the river and grabbed Henry by the neck. He was found 3 days later, face pale as chalk, his mouth full of black water. His last words, scrawled into the dirt beside him, "They're not from here." Locals started calling them the Hollow Children. They were said to carry the Blackwood blood, a mix of human and something far older. Their mother had birthed them in fire. Their father was already in the grave. And yet, somehow, they'd been born. When one hunter went searching for proof, he came across a cabin near the burned church. Inside, he found dozens of crude wooden dolls, all with faces carved to look like the same man, Ezekiel Thorne. Each doll had a string tied around its neck, and on the wall above them, painted in blood, the words read, "Father will come when the song is complete." It was the same song that haunted Marrow Creek for decades, a hymn of the Blackwoods, whispered through fog and bone. Some said the Hollow Children disappeared into the mountains, carried off by the mist. Others claimed they grew up to become the new mothers of the curse, unseen but eternal, birthing shadows in the dark. And though time erased the town of Marrow Creek from most maps, on some nights, travelers still swear they hear the faint sound of children singing from the ruins of the old church. 2 voices in perfect harmony. If you listen long enough, you'll hear them whisper your name. They were never human to begin with. It was supposed to be a simple dig. A government-backed mining expedition through the southern edge of the Appalachian Ozarks, right near what the old maps marked as Marrow Hollow. But those maps hadn't been updated in nearly a century. And for good reason. The towns once surrounding Hollow Ridge had long since vanished, swallowed by forest, time, and whispers of something that was never human. Still, the mining company sent a crew of 12 men led by Foreman Walter Briggs, a man who didn't believe in superstition. To him, every ghost story was just the echo of poverty. "Nothing down there but iron," he said, tapping the barrel of his rifle. "And money." He was wrong. The first few days were uneventful, mud, frost, and backbreaking work. But on the 6th day, while digging near the foundation of an old stone building, one of the men struck wood. They thought it was a coffin. When they cleared the dirt, it wasn't. It was a trap door, carved from black oak, sealed shut with iron nails that had rusted to dust. Etched into the wood were strange symbols, circles, lines, and runes that looked burned rather than carved. They didn't match any language Briggs had seen. Against the protests of his crew, he pried it open. The smell that came out wasn't rot. It was sweet, like decaying flowers. The chamber below was made of limestone and bone. Literally, the walls had human ribs pressed into the stone, fused together as if they had grown that way. In the center of the chamber stood a massive wooden cradle, easily 6 feet long. And above it, dangling from the ceiling, were hundreds of tiny dolls, each one made from twine, hair, and skin. The cradle rocked on its own. Briggs froze. One of the workers, a young man named Isaac, stepped closer and whispered, "Who built this place?" No one answered. Then, from inside the cradle, something moved. They saw a shape beneath the old blanket, small, childlike, twitching. Briggs, ever the skeptic, reached forward and pulled back the cover. Inside lay a skeletal infant, its mouth open in a silent scream, but its ribs expanded with every faint breath. And clutched in its tiny hands was a locket, with the name Blackwood engraved inside. Before anyone could react, the thing opened its eyes. Black. Empty. And deep enough to swallow the light of their lanterns. The men ran. But the tunnels didn't stay the same. Each turn seemed to twist back into itself, leading deeper instead of out. Some said they heard laughter echoing in the dark, the same sing-song voice of a little girl humming that cursed Appalachian lullaby. Isaac was the first to disappear. Then Morris. Each time someone screamed, the sound would be followed by soft giggling. When Briggs finally found a way out, he stumbled into daylight, covered in blood and dirt. But he wasn't alone. Behind him, the trapdoor slammed shut on its own. They say Briggs never spoke again. He was found wandering 3 days later along the railway line, whispering the same phrase over and over. "She's still feeding." He died that night, his body twisted in a way no human spine should bend. When a recovery team went back to investigate, they found the site abandoned. The ground was freshly dug up, the cradle gone. All that remained were the dolls, hundreds of them, hanging from the trees outside. Their faces had changed. They looked like the 12 men who had gone into the mine. The official report called it a mine collapse. But locals knew better. They say the ground itself was alive, that the Blackwood twins' descendants had taken root beneath the earth, their wombs birthing things that never stopped growing. And sometimes, late at night, if you press your ear to the soil near Hollow Ridge, you can still hear something moving below. Something wet. Something breathing. They weren't just born, one old miner once said, staring into the fire. They were planted. By the time the mining reports were buried and the government quietly bought out the land around Hollow Ridge, decades had passed. The name Blackwood had faded into folklore. The woods grew thick again. The rivers changed course. The world forgot, but the soil never did. In the summer of 1921, a family named the Holloways bought 200 acres of cheap farmland on the edge of what was once Merrow Creek. They were poor people, tenant farmers escaping the drought, and the land was offered at half price. No one told them why. The father, Samuel Holloway, was a God-fearing man who didn't believe in ghost stories. His wife Martha was quiet, always watching the tree line as if listening to something. And their son Eli, barely 10 years old, loved the orchard that grew wild near the edge of the property. It was strange though, no one could remember planting it. The trees grew twisted, knotted together like muscle and sinew. Their bark had a soft, almost fleshy texture. And the fruit bled when you bit into it. The first sign something was wrong came in the form of whispers. Martha said she could hear children laughing outside her window at night, though the nearest neighbor was 5 miles away. Eli would leave toys on the porch at night and find them missing by morning, replaced with small wooden dolls made from sticks and hair. Each doll had a symbol carved into its chest, a circle with 2 lines crossing through it, the same mark found on the trapdoor the miners had unearthed decades before. Then the ground began to move. Samuel noticed it first while plowing the south field. The soil pulsed under the blade, soft and rhythmic, like something breathing. When he dug deeper, he found a patch of white, smooth and curved. At first he thought it was stone, but when he touched it, it was warm. And beneath it, he heard a faint heartbeat. He covered it up and told no one. That night, the livestock screamed. By dawn, every animal in the barn was dead, their stomachs split open, their organs gone. Each carcass had been arranged in a spiral, and in the center of that spiral lay an apple from the orchard. Half-eaten. Dripping blood. The Holloways tried to flee, but when Samuel hitched the wagon, the road had disappeared. Fog had rolled in, thick and yellow-gray, turning the path to mist. No matter how far they drove, they circled back to the orchard, and standing among the trees were figures. Children, pale, hair tangled with vines, eyes black and unblinking. They watched silently as the family screamed. And from the branches above them hung dozens of dolls swinging gently in the wind, each one made in the likeness of a Holloway. That night, Martha woke to Eli's laughter coming from outside. She ran barefoot into the orchard, calling his name, her lantern trembling. What she found froze her blood cold. Eli was kneeling in the dirt, speaking softly to something half buried in the soil. It was a face. A woman's face, grown out of the ground, its eyes fluttering open with each breath. Roots spread from her scalp like veins through the earth. And when Martha screamed, the face smiled and whispered, "He's mine now." By morning, Samuel found only footprints. Small, bare, leading into the trees. Eli was gone. So was Martha. The orchard had grown thicker overnight, and at the base of one tree hung a single, new fruit, larger than the rest. When Samuel cut it open, he found a tiny human jawbone inside. He fell to his knees, whispering a prayer that ended with a sob. Weeks later, travelers found the Holloway farmhouse abandoned. The fields were overgrown, the house torn apart by roots bursting through the floorboards. And the orchard, that damned orchard, was thriving. But the fruit had changed. Each apple now bore the faint outline of a human face, smiling. Locals began calling the area the Flesh Orchard, claiming the soil itself feeds on whatever walks too close. Hunters say at night, you can still hear a child humming between the trees, a tune from long before their time. A lullaby, the same one sung by the Blackwood Sisters. Some say the orchard isn't made of trees at all, but veins, and that beneath it, the hollow children still grow, feeding the land that birthed them. You can bury blood, one old farmer once said, but you can't bury hunger. The following days were drenched in a silence that seemed alive. Even the crickets refused to sing near the Blackwood cabin. Locals whispered that the ground itself had turned cursed, a place where sound died and shadows grew thicker. Miles Grant, the local sheriff, had finally decided to step inside that house after the rain stopped. He had seen many things in his life, murders, drownings, even a bear mauling. But the moment he pushed open the Blackwood door, he knew this was different. The stench hit him first, rot, mold, and something else. something metallic. Blood, perhaps. The floorboards were slick with black moisture, and the air was heavy with decay. He moved forward carefully, flashlight trembling in his hand. On the wall were the same strange markings the priest had spoken of, spirals of soot and ash drawn with inhuman precision, and in the center of the main room a wooden hatch, bolted from the outside. Miles crouched and brushed away layers of grime. The latch was cold to the touch. He unhooked it. The hatch lifted with a long, painful creak. A rush of cold air blew into his face. The air of something buried, sealed for years. He aimed his flashlight down into the black hollow below. A staircase of rough wood descended into the dark, and for a moment he swore he heard breathing. He called out, "Anyone down there?" No reply. Just a soft, wet sound, like flesh dragging across stone. He descended, one step at a time. The deeper he went, the more the smell thickened, until his eyes watered. At the bottom was a dirt floor and cages. 6 of them, human-sized. Inside one, bones. Inside another, something that had once been human, now twisted, fused to the floor as if it had melted into the earth itself. And in the far corner, a cradle. He approached slowly. His flashlight flickered, sputtered, then steadied, revealing a small half-rotted wooden crib. Inside lay a skeleton. Tiny, but not quite human. The skull was too long, the jaw split at the center, teeth sharp as needles. A whisper crawled through the darkness. "Mama said you'd come." Miles froze. The voice came from behind him, high-pitched, echoing, like a child imitating an adult. He turned slowly. A figure crouched in the far corner, pale, hairless, its eyes reflecting the light like an animal's. It was smiling. "Mama said you'd all come back to feed us." Before he could react, it moved, impossibly fast. The flashlight hit the ground, beam swinging wildly as Miles screamed. Upstairs, the door slammed shut. Outside, the wind picked up. The house groaned, as though exhaling after a long sleep. And from deep below the floorboards, something laughed. The Blackwood Sisters had not just been witches. They had been breeders, creators of something that should never have been born. And their children were still waiting. The cabin stood in silence that night, bathed in a bruised moonlight that turned the whole mountain silver and dead. The air smelled of wet soil and decay, as if the mountain itself was breathing through the cracks of the earth. Eli, the youngest of the men who'd come looking for answers, pushed open the trapdoor that led beneath the Blackwood cabin. It groaned like a throat clearing before a scream. He lowered the lantern into the darkness. And that's when he saw them. Bones. But not quite human. Some were longer than they should have been, others curved like a serpent's spine. And in the center of the earthen floor was a hollow space. A pit lined with symbols scorched into the dirt, still faintly glowing red as if recently burned. "Mother?" The voice wasn't Eli's. It came from the pit. The sound froze his spine, a soft, trembling, childlike voice that echoed like it came from a cave miles deep. He moved the lantern closer. What he saw next didn't belong to this world. Tiny hands pressed against the inside of the dirt wall. The soil shifted, and something small pushed its way through. But when the head emerged, it wasn't right. The skin was pale gray, slick like clay, and its eyes were milky white. No pupils, no soul. It blinked at the light, hissed, and retreated back into the darkness. Eli stumbled backward, his boots crunching over brittle bones. But before he could reach the ladder, something else stirred in the pit, heavier, larger. The earth cracked. A low, guttural moan rolled out, shaking dust from the ceiling. He scrambled up the ladder, slamming the trapdoor shut, but he could still hear it breathing down there, slow and wet, like something that had just woken up after a long, deep sleep. Outside, the forest was silent, too silent. The crickets had stopped. Even the wind refused to move. Eli ran down the mountain path, but every step seemed to echo, as though the woods were whispering his name behind him. By morning, the cabin had vanished. No smoke, no sound, just an open space and a deep hollow where it used to stand, as if the mountain had swallowed it whole. But far away, in the next town over, a woman named Martha Tate woke up screaming. She said she heard scratching inside her walls that night, and the voice of a child whispering, "Where's my mother?" The curse of the Blackwood Sisters had started to crawl beyond the woods. 3 weeks after the Blackwood cabin was swallowed by the mountain, the town of Brim Hollow began to rot from the inside out. Animals were being found dead, gutted clean, their bones arranged in strange, swirling patterns near old wells and barns. The local preacher said it was the devil. The sheriff said it was wolves. But Martha Tate knew better. She could hear them. Every night around 2 a.m. she'd wake to a faint thumping in the walls, slow, rhythmic, like a heartbeat pulsing through the wooden boards. And sometimes she swore she could hear murmurs, words that didn't belong to any language known to man. Then came the morning she found her son's bed empty. The window was open, the curtains torn, and a trail of muddy footprints led toward the forest. Bare footprints, tiny, child-sized, but there were 2 sets. She followed them with a lantern clutched tight in her shaking hand. The path twisted through the woods until it led her to the edge of an old creek. And there, standing ankle-deep in the water, was her boy. Only, it wasn't him. His skin was pale, almost bluish. His head tilted at an unnatural angle, and his mouth hung open wider than any jaw should stretch. In that wide, gaping mouth was another set of whispering lips, muttering words she couldn't understand. "Thomas?" she whispered. The boy turned his head, slowly, too slowly, and smiled. "They said you'd come." Something moved behind him. In the fog, 2 women stepped out, their faces hidden by long, tangled hair, their dresses tattered, soaked through with mud. Even in the dim light, Martha could see their eyes, pale as the moon, and lifeless. The Blackwood Sisters. The air turned bitter cold. Martha's lantern flickered and died. The sisters began humming, a sickly lullaby that seemed to come from beneath the ground. The boy turned toward them, his limbs jerking like a puppet pulled by invisible strings. "Mama," he croaked, "they said you'll help us be born again." Then he lunged. By dawn, Martha Tate's house was empty. The townsfolk who entered later said the walls were covered in handprints, hundreds of them, small and clawed, pressed deep into the wood. And in the center of her kitchen floor was a message written in blood and ash: "The Mother's Rise." The mountain remembers. The sheriff sealed off the forest. The preacher led prayers. But deep beneath the hollow, in the buried ruins of the Blackwood home, something was breathing again. The curse wasn't just spreading. It was evolving. By early autumn, the woods around Brim Hollow had gone silent. No birds, no crickets. Not even the wind dared to pass through the trees. But what terrified the townsfolk most wasn't the silence. It was the laughter. At first, they thought it was just echoes, a trick of the valley. But every night, around the same hour, a faint giggling could be heard drifting from the edge of the forest, high-pitched, distant, and wrong. The sheriff finally had enough. He gathered 5 men, all hunters, strong and armed, and rode out at dusk to end whatever nightmare had taken root. Among them was old Caleb Boone, the last living man who remembered the Blackwood fire 30 years ago. He tried to warn them, said the ground in that valley still bled when it rained. They laughed it off. By midnight, they reached the ruins. What they found wasn't what they expected. The cabin that had burned down decades ago was standing again. Not rebuilt, grown. Its walls were made of something that looked like timber but pulsed faintly, like flesh under the skin. Veins of black sap ran through it. The front door was carved from a single tree trunk, and in the center was a pattern, the same spiral of bones seen on every slaughtered animal that month. The youngest hunter, Jack Latham, tried to open it. It opened on its own. Inside, the air smelled of rot and honey. The walls were lined with jars, hundreds of them, filled with a thick reddish fluid. And floating in each jar was something human. A hand. A tongue. An eye, Caleb whispered. "Dear God, they're still here." Then came the laughter. From the darkness at the back of the cabin, small figures began to crawl forward. Children. Dozens of them, naked, pale. Their eyes clouded over like milk. But their faces looked wrong. Their mouths were too wide. Their teeth blackened, and where their hearts should have been, there was only an empty, pulsing cavity, leaking black sap. They circled the men slowly. One of the children reached out, touching Jack's boot. He screamed as his skin began to blister, the veins in his leg turning black. The others moved closer, whispering in voices that sounded like many people speaking at once. Caleb raised his rifle and fired. The shot echoed like thunder. One of the children fell, but when it hit the floor, it broke apart into a swarm of centipedes and writhing roots. The cabin shuddered. The floor split open beneath them. Out of the pit came a low, guttural moan. Something massive was waking. The men ran, stumbling over each other, firing into the darkness. Caleb turned back once, and in the flicker of the lantern he saw her, one of the Blackwood Sisters. Her face was ageless, her skin stretched tight, her hair long and wet as if she'd just crawled out of the earth. In her arms she cradled something. Not a baby, but a bundle of bone and roots, twitching softly. "You took our sons," she hissed. "Now we take yours." Caleb's lantern burst. The forest lit up for just a moment, enough for the others to see the walls of the hollow moving. When dawn came, only Caleb staggered out. His hair had gone pure white and his eyes black as tar. He never spoke again. He just kept whispering one thing over and over until the day he died. The hollow has children now. Autumn deepened, and the people of Brim Hollow stopped sleeping. The children's laughter never stopped now. It circled the town every night, echoing through empty barns, chimneys, even the wells. Livestock were found bloodless, their bodies arranged in strange spiral shapes pointing toward the Blackwood Hollow. That was when Reverend Silas Marin arrived. He was not a local man. He came from St. Louis, summoned by desperate letters and the whispers of witchcraft in the Ozarks. Tall, rail-thin, eyes like frozen glass, Marin had once served as an army chaplain during the war. He'd seen men torn apart by cannon fire, and yet nothing had ever shaken his faith. Until Brim Hollow. The moment he stepped off his wagon, he said he felt it. The air around the valley pushed back. The church bell refused to ring when he tried to call mass. The iron clapper inside had rusted black overnight, even though it had been cleaned the day before. Marin met with Caleb Boone, the old man who'd survived the previous episode's horrors. Caleb could barely speak anymore. He simply drew the same thing over and over in the dirt, a spiral made of teeth. The preacher gathered a small group, 5 townsmen, including the sheriff's brother and 2 miners. They armed themselves with salt, silver, and the good book. At sunset, they rode toward the hollow. By midnight, fog had swallowed the valley. The trees looked dead, but dripped with black moisture. The men prayed as they walked, and every time they said amen, something in the woods whispered it back. The preacher carried a crucifix carved from white oak, pure and unstained. But as they neared the ruins of the Blackwood cabin, the wood began to rot in his hand. They found what was left of the hunters from before, bones fused with roots, skulls still open-mouthed, eyes replaced with tree sap. The preacher dropped to his knees. "Lord, grant them rest," he whispered. Then, the earth under them moved. A tremor rolled through the hollow, and from the soil sprouted black vines, writhing like snakes. The men hacked at them with axes, but every cut released a scream, not of a plant, but a person. The preacher shouted scripture, his voice breaking the silence. "Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil." A voice cut through the fog, soft, melodic. It was a woman. "There is no death here, Reverend. Only birth." From the ruins stepped Catherine Blackwood, her eyes like 2 glowing coals. She looked exactly as described in the old journals, the eldest sister, the one who had married the knight. Behind her came her sisters, faces hidden in their long hair, and behind them the children, dozens of them, pale and still, like a congregation awaiting their sermon. The preacher raised his cross. "In the name of God Almighty, I cast you." The ground split open beneath him, roots wrapped around his legs, pulling him toward the earth. The men screamed, firing their rifles, but the bullets turned to ash midair. The sisters moved closer, humming an old hymn, but twisted. The same tune sung in the church, now inverted, broken. Marin's voice grew hoarse. "You can't have them. This town is under his grace." Catherine stepped forward. "No, Reverend. It's under ours." The vines surged upward, swallowing the preacher whole. The others fled, but as they looked back, they saw the preacher standing, suspended in midair, crucified by roots. His eyes burned white, his mouth still whispering scripture as black sap poured from his throat. By morning, the fog lifted. In the church, the bell finally rang again, all on its own. The townsfolk rushed inside and found the bell filled with blood. Carved into its metal were 3 words that no one in Brim Hollow would ever forget. The birth begins. By the winter of 1893, Brim Hollow was a ghost town. No carriages came. No mail arrived. The last telegraph sent from the nearby post read only 6 words. "The mountain breathes when it sleeps." The few remaining men, the miners, the sheriff, and a handful of farmers swore to end it. They had seen Reverend Marin's fate with their own eyes. They'd heard the laughter of the hollow children. They'd buried wives who'd woken up whispering to the trees. They decided there was only one answer left: burn it all. The preacher's followers gathered at the edge of the valley, carrying barrels of kerosene stolen from the mine. The plan was simple: set the entire mountain aflame, let the fire cleanse what faith could not. But nothing in Brim Hollow ever went according to plan. As they climbed the ridge, they saw something that froze them where they stood. The trees, hundreds of them, had grown faces. Not carved, not imagined. The bark itself had twisted into the likeness of people they knew. Men, women, children. Some were even moving their mouths silently, as if begging for help. "Light it," the sheriff whispered, voice trembling. "Before it's too late." They poured the oil. They struck the match. The fire roared to life. Flames spread through the hollow like veins of molten light. The forest screamed. Every tree released a wailing sound, so human it made the men drop to their knees. The sky turned red, and the ground trembled as if something underneath was thrashing. Then came the smell. Not smoke, blood. The sheriff looked down and saw the soil bubbling. What oozed from beneath wasn't sap or mud. It was thick, black ichor, hot and alive. The fire burned for hours, the men chanting, praying, screaming. But when the smoke cleared at dawn, their victory turned to horror. The trees were gone. Yes, the cabin too. But in their place was a crater. And in the crater, something moved. A massive, pulsing structure, like a heart made of wood and bone, throbbing beneath a web of roots. From its surface, faint cries echoed, not human, not animal. And as the men watched in frozen terror, it split open. From within crawled dozens of figures, blackened, scorched, yet alive. They looked like newborns, but wrong. Too large, their eyes glowing faintly. They clawed their way onto the soil, crying in broken voices that echoed through the burned forest. Catherine Blackwood appeared beside them, untouched by flame. Her skin was pale as frost, her hair slick with ash. She smiled faintly, eyes fixed on the men. "You can't kill what was never born," she said. "You only helped it wake up." The sheriff raised his rifle, hands shaking. "What are you?" She stepped closer. "We were mothers once, now we're roots. We feed the mountain. We birth what it wants." Behind her, the newborn creatures began to chant, in perfect unison. A single phrase, over and over, that made the air vibrate. "The hollow is the womb." The sheriff fired. The bullet hit her square in the chest. And she didn't even flinch. She reached out, touched the wound, and black sap dripped out like tears. "You brought the fire," she said softly. "Now burn with us." The heart beneath them convulsed, and the ground erupted. Flames burst upward, consuming the men. Their screams echoed for miles as the forest reignited, this time not from oil, but from within. The soil itself burned, as though the mountain's blood had turned to fire. By morning, nothing remained of the expedition. Only a black scar where Brim Hollow used to be, and in the distance, faint crying, like infants echoing through the ash. Weeks later, travelers passing through claimed to see smoke rising from the mountain at night, glowing red from the inside out. And sometimes, if you listened long enough, you could still hear it. The whisper of a woman's voice in the wind, saying, "The birth is complete." Spring 2024. The Ozarks had become a tourist trail by then. Hikers, bloggers, amateur explorers chasing the haunted legends of Missouri. None more famous than the Brim Hollow Ghost Trail, a name coined by online thrill seekers who claimed that strange lights still flickered in the woods where the town once stood. Most people went there for the stories. Only a few ever went deep enough to find what was left. Among them was a small YouTube crew called Grave Signal, 5 college friends who hunted forgotten places. Cameras, drones, flashlights, a single old Ford truck. They laughed, joked, and called the trip just another ghost town adventure. But the road to Brim Hollow was long gone. The deeper they drove, the more the forest seemed to close in. No cell signal, no sound except the wheels crunching gravel. "Guys," one of them said, "does it feel like we're being watched?" The joke died in his throat when they saw the first sign. A wooden cross nailed to a dead oak. No name, just burned words. "Do not dig." By dusk, they found the ruins. A flat clearing of black soil covered in moss. No houses, no stones. Just the faint outline of a church foundation. They set up camp and started filming. Wind picked up. The drone above flickered out. Their mics began picking up low frequencies, not wind, but whispers. When they played it back, the whisper formed words. One phrase, repeated, "The hollow is the womb." They laughed it off, thinking it was some kind of EVP trick. But as night fell, one of them, Jessica, wandered off to pee in the woods and didn't come back. The others searched, flashlights slicing through the fog. After 10 minutes, they found her standing perfectly still, barefoot, eyes open but empty. "Jess?" She turned slowly. Her voice came out wrong, slow, layered, like several people speaking through her. The mothers wait below. Then she collapsed. When they lifted her, her hands were covered in mud. But not just mud. Something moved in it. Tiny roots, still wriggling. The crew packed their gear in panic, racing back to the truck. But the forest path was gone, completely swallowed by trees. Every direction they turned looked the same. They ran until their flashlights started to die. And that's when they saw it. The earth ahead was breathing. A slow, rhythmic rise and fall beneath the soil. One of them, Kevin, screamed, "It's hollow underneath," and slammed his boot into the ground. The soil cracked, revealing a faint red light beneath, like embers glowing under glass. The air filled with a sickening sweet smell, honey and rot. Then came the sound. A heartbeat, not mechanical, not distant. It was alive. The ground split open. The group tumbled into darkness. landing on something soft that pulsed under their weight. Their flashlights flickered, and they realized what they were standing on wasn't dirt. It was flesh. The cavern walls were veined with black roots and glistening sap. Embedded in the walls were faces, hundreds of them, frozen mid-scream. Some were old. Some were modern. Jessica began to move again. She stood up, her voice a whisper. They never stopped growing. From the shadows, shapes emerged. Women, hair matted with soil, skin pale as candle wax. The Blackwood Sisters. Unaged. Smiling. Behind them, hundreds of hollow-eyed children rose from the roots, all whispering that same ancient phrase, "The hollow is the womb." The last camera kept rolling as the crew screamed, the lens catching flashes of red light, roots coiling, the sisters' pale faces closing in, until the footage went black. Weeks later, the missing persons reports flooded the sheriff's office. The truck was found abandoned, the forest grown over where the clearing used to be, but every year since, new hikers vanish on that trail. And if you walk through the woods of Brim Hollow on a quiet night, you can still hear the faint sound of children's laughter beneath your feet, and a woman's whisper rising from the soil saying, "The womb is never empty." The first light of dawn crept over the Appalachians, turning the fog into rivers of gold and blood. For the first time in over a century, the Blackwood house stood silent. No whispers, no cries, no footsteps echoing through its bones. The townsfolk who had gathered at the edge of the woods dared not go closer. They watched in terrified silence as smoke curled from the mansion's broken windows, twisting into the shape of faces, faces of the dead. Inside, the scent of burnt earth and decay hung heavy. The altar room was gone, reduced to ash and shattered glass. But deep beneath the debris, something still pulsed faintly, something alive. It was the last remaining Blackwood, Eveline. Her skin was scorched, her hair turned white as bone. She crawled across the ruined floor, clutching a blackened cross that had once belonged to her father. Her voice cracked as she whispered, "Father, it's done." But then, the ground trembled. From the ashes of the altar, the earth split open, and a long clawed hand reached out. It wasn't human anymore. It was her father's, but changed. Twisted. The curse hadn't died. It had been waiting. Eveline screamed as the hand grabbed her ankle and dragged her into the earth below, her cries muffled by soil and stone. Moments later, silence returned once more. By the time the sheriff and his men dared enter, all that remained was a single phrase carved into the floorboards, burnt into the wood like fire itself. One family. One curse. No survivors. The sheriff turned pale. "Seal it," he ordered quietly. "Bury the whole damn place." And they did. They buried the Blackwood estate under layers of earth, trees, and silence. The land was declared cursed. No one built there again. But sometimes, hikers passing through the Appalachian trails still hear whispers at dusk. A woman's voice, soft and broken, calling out from beneath the ground, "Please, don't wake my family." And if you listen long enough, they say you can hear the sound of a lullaby, sung by a voice that shouldn't exist anymore. Some curses die with time. Others only wait to be remembered. If you ever find yourself deep in the Appalachian woods and you come across a clearing where no birds sing, turn back. Because the Blackwood Sisters are still there, waiting for someone to finish what they began.